Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our CAD training for February 2025, our ongoing series. Today we're going to be discussing rendering. It's going to be more of a demonstration of what we currently do in-house or what I can do, but I know quite a few of you have had some interest in learning how to do this. So I thought we'd give it a quick overview, let you know what's involved and how I do it at this time, how I create the presentations. All right. Why do we do renderings? Several different reasons. It helps to enhance communication with when there's people in the public who may not be as familiar with reading technical drawings. It gives them a little bit better idea of what we are proposing on our site. It increases engagement by having them be able to, since they can understand what we're suggesting, then they will have questions. We can get engagement with the public or at meetings or even with the client if they're not familiar with plans. We also do this for marketing of our own company, Pantera, but we've also been asked to do renderings for our clients. They put these on phone core or on their websites. I know that Horizon uses some of our renderings so they can show which lots have been purchased on their development. So it can be used for the marketing, not only for Pantera, but also for our clients' organizations. And the final, the final reason I have listed is for regulatory approvals. Again, it goes back to the enhanced communication. It's just a way for people to understand our plans a little bit easier, a little bit more familiar with seeing green and blue or buildings and such. Helps to hopefully answer questions that they may have about our design. Some of the tools that can be used for creating these plan renderings. The first two, Autodesk Civil 3D, obviously we use that every day. That's one that we use. And then primarily Photoshop from Adobe is what I have a copy of that. We can have that installed and learn about that. That's those two things right there. That's the main tools that I use in our process. Other possibilities are Adobe Illustrator, SketchUp, Lumion, Affinity Photo and Designer, and possibly even coming soon, AI. Um, that's always an option. We'll have to see how that works. I have a couple of examples I can show you. Uh, and then all of our handouts and sample files can be located on the S drive under today's training folder, 2025-02-render. And additional resources, Photoshop's help file, and there's a link to YouTube videos just in general, some options of how other people do their renderings, some things to look for, but very generic. And of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask me. Also, I have met with Eric and I got together last week. We discussed other options, different techniques. So that might be another possibility that we're going to be expanding some different processes. Eric has a really good knowledge on how to create different brushes that might help to add additional depth and texture to our plans. All right, so now we'll go right into the actual demonstration. So whenever I'm asked to create a rendering, I typically start within AutoCAD. I take one of the plan's sheet files. Sometimes it's the geometry plan, sometimes it's the landscaping plan. Usually it's the landscaping plan. That way we can get everything rendered. But then I go through and I create a sheet and extract that MD into it so I can manipulate the layers exactly how I would like them. Now in this case, I'm showing the Bellefonte waterfront. It's a recent rendering that I have updated. It will give you a pretty good idea of what I usually separate and how I prepare things. So in this file, this is a separate sheet file that was created. And then in that sheet file, we don't need all the layers. A lot of the utilities get turned off. A couple of the dimensions may get turned off. We go through, I set it up through the viewport, which is key, through the viewport, and then I can create several tabs. So in this case, I have 3 tabs. The rendering, which includes most of the line work, it has actually all the required line work that I would want. The topo, the proposed and existing street names, buildings, hatching, all that information is all placed into the first render tab. Then I'll create a second render tab, and that gets rid of the contours. It tries to, simplify the line work as much as possible. This is made so that we can easier block down color for our project. Now I'll show you how that works later on here. And then the final one, lately I've been trying to include an aerial photograph as part of the background. It gives a little bit more texture, a little bit more detail for around the site, a little more context, I guess. But I keep each one of those types of tabs separate. And what we do is then I can go, and when I go to plot, there is a configuration for the plotter called EPS to file. EPS is an encapsulated PostScript file, which just means it takes all the images and turns it into a raster design. So that's what we're looking at. We create an EPS for each one of these tabs, and then I can get out of AutoCAD. And I'll go over to Photoshop. So when I'm in Photoshop, first thing I do, I'll go up to File, Open, and I have created let me go to the S Training Design folder here. I put additional files in here for everybody to reference. These are all samples. Photoshop files can become quite large, so it's important to try to keep that in mind. There's not much I can really do about it because the way that Photoshop handles images is as a raster image, which means it needs to store information for every pixel on that drawing. Whereas AutoCAD is a vector program. It only needs to remember the actual geometry of the line work. So you have less data points. So these files can get quite large once we start adding all the color to them. But first thing I usually would do is I would open up all three of the files, the EPS files that I created from the, let me go ahead and, oops, I keep hitting that. So I'd go up here to open. Oh, got to go back to the S drive again. So I would take those three files and I can open them all at the same time. This little window will pop up. This is going to be the conversion from a PostScript or a vector-based image to the raster image. I typically look in, most of our renderings are 24 by 36, so that stays the same. This resolution is where I usually change this to be around 100. The higher the resolution, the more detailed the drawing will be, but I found 100 is a good in-between as far as file size versus quality when we go to plot. Now, our plotter can do up to 600 dots per inch, but you would have a very large file size if we did something at that highest resolution. You could go higher. 300 would be midway. It's still, the file size would be a large increase. So 100 is what I found to be fairly decent. It works for both our plotter and if we want to use it online or on our website. So hit OK on that. And it will ask me that 3 times, once for each of the files that I went to open. And one thing that Eric just pointed out to me the other day, I also saw the other change there. I have always been using the RGB, which is red, green, blue color palette. Now our plotter uses the CMKY, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So it's a different way of mixing colors together. I don't know if that would help improve if I change to that format. I haven't messed with it enough. We will be testing that in the future. So as you can see, all three of these files came in. They were rasterized, but they're all turned 90 degrees from what I really would want them. Haven't really figured out that setting. I haven't really caused me an issue because I can go up here and just say, hey, rotate this 90 degrees clockwise, counterclockwise. And I can do that to all three of them. So it usually doesn't take much time to do that. It's much easier to do this than try to figure out a plotter setting. So as you can see, we got three files. Typically, I usually start my work with the sample number 1, which has all the line work in it. And it's hard to see all what you'll see here, the gray and white checkerboard. That means that it's transparent in those locations. Now, just like AutoCAD, I base a lot of my work on layers. So layers can be added to Photoshop. It's pretty simple. You can hit down here, you hit a new layer. But something that's different in Photoshop compared to AutoCAD is that based on your layer configuration is what you would see. So right now, layer 2 is on top of layer 1. If I would go over to my colors and make white my foreground, we can use the tool that's called the Paint Can. And I just put white all over my line work. Again, so it works from top down on your layer. So there's a lot of times that you'll be adjusting your layers up and down so that you don't have a shadow on top of a house, or but you want your sidewalk to be in the shadow, but you want the building to be out of the shadow. So you have to make sure that maybe a tree is in between. So it can be a little confusing. It can get a little tricky sometimes. But when I go and create my layers, I keep in mind actually like the height. So I start at ground level and I work my way up through elevation. All right, so if I take this and drag it down below, hey, look, my line work just showed up because now the white is behind my line work, and my line work had all that checkerboard in it, so that meant it was transparent. Okay, I'm going to close these up, and I'm going to open up a little bit more complete. And here's my, so this is my completed rendering of the Bellefonte waterfront. You can see I have lots of different layers over here. There's probably at least 20 of them. You can go through, you can just click on these and you can rename them. It's important to do that so that you don't lose track of what you're doing. And you can see, if we go way, oops. So at the very top, I have PR trees, which are turned off in this plan. The client didn't want to show the trees at this time because they weren't sure where they were going to be located. So at one point, I did have trees all through there. And you can see as soon as I turned that little tree layer on, they all popped up throughout the site. But they're at the top because I wanted the shadow, which is associated with the tree, to actually overlay like the sidewalk and such. So let's zoom way in here. Now, the more you zoom in with rasterized images, the blurrier they will get. So that's one of the disadvantages of using the raster image format. But you can see here we have a tree. It looks like it has leaves, has a little bit of outline, but it definitely has a shadow, and that shadow covers up the items below it. So let's say if I take my shadow and I move it down, way down here under the lights, you'll notice now the brick pattern shows over top of the trees. So keep in mind, you got to move things around, make sure it looks like you're almost flying over it in an airplane. So in this case, this tree is a little bit out of place. It's probably not as tall as this 3-story building. These trees probably should be put below the building, but there's probably other reasons why we had to keep it up above. All right. let me break this down a little bit simpler. So what you'll find is those EPS files that I exported from AutoCAD, I renamed them to be line work. Um, so I'm going to hide all the other layers. So this is where I started. I had this line work layer, and then I usually add a background layer like that. So you'll notice the line work was the one that does not have the contours on it. There is so many settings in Photoshop. It takes a lot of trial and error and seeing what actually works to make the drawings look good. Um, so in this case, there's the line work. There's different ways to have that line work show up. For line work on the top, I use a multiply, which means any color that's below it, it gets darker and darker as it goes. So that's always something to look into. There's, like I said, tons of ways to configure this. But essentially, you really need to think about what elevation each item is located, and then you can create a layer for each type of feature. So in this case, I have a lawn way in the back. Now, when I first start, there's no effects added to it. So it's just a big green. So let me do this again. I'm going to open up one of our line works here. We'll go with sample. I guess we'll do both of these. I'm not worried too much about the aerial. All right. So, like I said, I have 3 separate files. I usually combine them together. So let's see here. We're going to call this line work. And in this drawing here, I'm going to add a background layer so that I can see my work going on right now. All right, so now I can see you've got my contours, I got my everything like that. Now I need to get this line work in. So I can just take this layer and drag it in. Doesn't look great. This is another one of those things where there's probably a better way. I just have not used it enough or figured it out or taken the time to look into it, because I know I can go in here pretty quickly, select the move tool, take this across and get it fairly close to the one above it. And Eric's saying paste in place function like in Civil 3D. So, hey, okay, we can try that. Take this back out. You can delete layers. So I can take this, edit. Ooh, I guess I got to select it all. Edit, copy, edit. I probably have to make a new layer. Edit. I don't see a paste in place, so let me see if I select all of this. Now I might see something. I can do a paste into. We'll say that. I found it never seems to quite line up anyway. So we'll have to definitely look on that, work on that, see if there's an easier way of doing it. Like I said, I usually just go by eyeball, say, hey, that looks pretty close. I'll zoom in maybe 400% and scroll down to there, and then I'll start using my arrow keys. So that one up and down looks pretty good. And there, those line up, and those line up. As far as the line work around the edges here, if I move it left one, you can see it bumps a little bit to the left. Right, it bumps a little bit to the right. Up, down, and that gets it pretty well in there. So now, essentially, I just put line work on top of line work. But it's all in one drawing. So I would take all 3 of the line work versions and put into here. And I do not need, oops. All right. So now I have my white background. I have an empty layer, so I try to keep as clean as possible without extra layers just so because there can be so many. Then I have this layer. Oops, turn it on. With just line work. Here's something that's kind of strange. You can have two layers named exactly the same thing. I do not recommend that. And here is, I'm just going to I'll call this one contours. That way I know which one of these layers I'm working with. So I'll put contours down at the bottom, put line work at the top. I'll change this style, or not style, but layer function to be multiply. And I'll show you why here in a second. Let me get this to be a little bit larger. Again, there is so many settings, so many different ways of doing the Photoshop, using Photoshop. This is just how I have come about doing it. I have not had any formal training on this. I've read some books and just a lot of practice. So it takes time, but everybody else may have some different ideas on how to do renderings, different styles, and that's perfectly fine. This is just what I found works fairly well for me, and usually can get a rendering from start to finish in less than 4 hours. Some of the work, some of the longer work is actually getting the layers in AutoCAD set up so I can have these sheets look proper. Because that's very important, because one of the things that you can do, let me see, I'm going to create a new layer. Let's say I want to, well, I'll color the building. I'm going to pick a brown. It doesn't really matter which color. I like to try to block in the colors as roughly as quickly as possible. Okay, so we have a brown here. I'm on my own separate layer. I'm going to turn, let me see, no contours. Actually, no, I wanted the contours on. Up here, all layers. Now watch what happens. This paint can will only go until it is stopped by some other line. And that works for all, it's referencing all layers that are currently visible. So if I undo that and uncheck this, the whole screen becomes brown. So this is a key for really rendering and putting down color quickly. You need to have this all layers turned on. The problem is you need to make sure with contours, they could be blocking off part of the area that you want to have rendering. And therefore it won't be continuous, it won't be contiguous, and the color will stop there and you'll have to click a lot more times. So that is why I typically block my colors in using without contours. Now I can click here. Oops, I forgot to change the setting. Edit, undo, all layers. Make sure I'm on the correct layer. And there we go. We get a pretty quick way to fill in color. And you'll notice that the letters, see in the center of the O's and anything that's closed, it does not color because it cannot get to that. It's only what's continuous. So if I turn off my line work, you'll notice part of the hatching, any line work shows up. That line going through the middle of the building, that does not get color. So that's something that I usually go back and I hand adjust. There is a ton of tools. I usually use the paintbrush or the pencil. I like the pencil only because I can change the size of it fairly easily, and the thickness is all in here. One other little hint is, let's say we go up to 13. So there's the size of, now right now that shows up because my caps lock is turned off. If I turn my caps lock on, it's then, you don't see it. It's called the exact cursor. I could go through and clean up my CAD output even more if I wanted to get rid of this text so I don't have to work around it. But I find it's just as quick to fix it in Photoshop than it is to try to figure out if the layer is on, if the text is on the proper layer, or if it doesn't. If I'm not familiar at all with the drawing in CAD, it's just simpler for me to get some of the main things to show up. Yes, it's a little bit of a hassle in here, but I still feel it's quicker most of the time to just go like this and say, okay, get rid of these lettering. I don't need that. And again, you try to minimize the extra amount in CAD. I might do that, or there's a selection tool that I use that you can just kind of outline and hit a couple keys and it fills it in with the paint bucket. And again, you're done. So there's different ways, like I said. But yes, you could set it up take a little bit more time in AutoCAD to clean up all of your text and get that all cleared out so you only have line work. So there you go. You have a quick outline of a building. If it's a more complicated building, sometimes I'll use my selection tool to actually go and go into precise mode and go through and I'll just outline it. And this is more like drawing a polyline in AutoCAD. On buildings, this might be quicker, or this might be more accurate, I guess I should say. Not necessarily quicker, but it will get you the rough idea. Let me see, I don't know where I started. One of the things that's, oh, I must start it right there. So now I have my selection. I can again just fill that. And now if I turn off my line work, you'll see it's a much more solid brown block. No more of the little individual hatch. Sometimes it makes a difference. It depends on the scale of your drawing, how detailed or how exact you need to be with your coloring. There is some wiggle room with buildings depending on the roof types. That it being exact helps a lot. Because typically, let me see here, I want to turn off my selection. So I'll go in, I'll block out the building colors, I'll block out the street colors, the existing pavement. This hatch pattern will cause a big problem with filling with the paint bucket because it will pick every single little individual piece. So in that case, I might take, if I didn't export the CAD file without the hatching on, I'll take like a regular paintbrush or pencil and I will actually just outline the area. I'll just, and there's different hotkey commands. Oh, didn't think I'd pick purple, but that's okay. So you can click quite quickly around the site. And if you even, let's say you block this off, notice how I can even put the purple over top of the building. Now in that case, that's no good, but that's because, oh, I put it on the same, this is another big issue. Do not put it on the same layer. Almost every color and every feature should be on a separate layer. Now in this case I can't do much conversion to it, so I'm actually going to have to undo my pencil, which causes a problem. Let me see here. Scroll back through my history. I can go up to here and delete, and it would actually ask me to delete each one individually as I did it. So this could take some time if you mess up, but another option would be there is called a magic wand selection tool. You can take that, you click on a color, it will select the continuous color. It's not as exact. In this case it worked, but see how I lost my brown because they were on the same layer. So like I said, tons of different options in Photoshop. It takes a while to understand what each tool does. I mean, people do this for livings. That's all they work in is Photoshop. I have a very rudimentary, basic understanding of it. So, got to work your way through it. Let me see here. So I'm going back to the finished rendering at this point to give the next thing. So I was working up through here. I'll put in different color. I'll name my different layers. Here's water. I put additional effects you can put by layer. That's another thing. That's why I try to separate a lot of the items out by layer, is so that I can add different effects to them. So like I said, tons of different options, lots of different ways you can do it. But I just kind of work my way up through here and block out all the color. So in this case, let me go back to the other drawing. In case of water, I would say, okay, pick my blue color off the palette. Now I'll know ahead of time. Let me see here. Notice how the water has 3 dashes. So if I use my paint bucket on here, the water would flow right out through the edge and fill in everything in. That's not what we want. So in that case, I know that that's going to happen. I will take my pencil and I'll basically just say, hey, do a quick outline right on that edge so that it fills in the gaps. There's probably a way you could do this with your selection tool, maybe a little bit quicker by changing your settings for that. Like I said, it's just as simple for me to say, okay, I'm old school. I'll just do it this way. Um, this is an older version of Photoshop, quite old. Um, it still works, still has a lot of the main functions that the current Photoshop does, but at this time we have not migrated over to the current Photoshop, which requires a subscription fee. Like I said, this software still works for most of the items that we are asked to do. Um, so it doesn't seem like the cost of those subscriptions would really be of benefit for us right now. There is some new AI tools that are coming along in Photoshop that may change how things work. That might be enough of a benefit, but right now we're still just testing these things out. So I'll go through real quick like that, change to my paint can. Now, I still have it on all layers. So if I do that, I lose my Spring Creek. So in this case, since I have a closed outline, I'll turn that off. That fills it in right away. And again, it's all about setting up your layers, making sure that you know what layer is above the next layer and working from the ground up. Let me see. Okay. Was there any questions about if you spend more time, I should say this, if you spend more time in AutoCAD and you're familiar with the project and really get your layers configured with this in mind, you can make the rendering probably go even faster. If you turn off all the text, if you hide all the hatching, I know that's not always possible because of if you're not doing the project or you're not familiar with the project, it's easier to just take the drawing and go from there and make the changes in Photoshop itself. Um, it all comes down to how comfortable you are with the AutoCAD project. One of the other, I mean, blocking out the colors, that's the first thing I always do. So let's say I do proposed paving and I'll pick a gray. I usually try to get somewhere around 25%. If you hover over, it's 30, so 25. I'll go in here real quick and I'll say, okay, make sure all my layers are on. I'm on my own paving layer. I'll just click wherever I think there will be proposed pavement. And that gets it filled in pretty quickly. It's rough, but see how I'd have to click each one in between each one of those hatchings. So yes, that slows it down. But in this case, I know I can just essentially take my pencil tool and outline the area and just kind of scrub over top of it and it fills it in. Lots of different options, lots of different ways of doing things. And essentially what you need to learn first is just how the tools work. And the only way to really do that is just to mess around with things. I mean, I can go down here and that means I have to click each one of those parking stalls separately. It might be okay if you just need one of those days where you mindlessly click. But if you're in a deadline or something like that, and you need to get this done faster, I would say the pencil tool, or you just basically draw lines. You know, you get a bigger, um, you increase the diameter of the brush. I mean, I can make that pretty big, and I just do broad strokes across it. And you'd be a little bit more careful than what I'm being right now, so you don't go outside. Amazing enough, the color inside the lines, within the lines thing from like elementary school actually does apply here. So there's ways around it to fix it, but it works pretty quick. Like these numbers, I can go real quick and just super quick. You get all that color down, you know, okay, once you have everything really let me see, I'll put we want some lawn in here. Get some green. You do a layer for your existing pavement. You do a layer for your proposed pavement, proposed sidewalks. Now in this case, there's different pavement in different areas, so I did a different layer for each type of pavement. There's concrete, water, all those things would get their own layers, and I would block in a solid color for each one of them. And then once I have all those colors blocked in with the layers in the proper location as far as the elevation wise vertically, I usually then start to add some of the little effects, um, the, the shadows and everything like that. Because what happens is the way that Photoshop works, you can add um, these effects, but it applies to everything essentially on that layer. So you have to be a little bit careful, and that's again a reason why. Here's a good example: trees. Canopy trees. I'll put on one layer. If I have more type than one type of canopy trees, I might make 4 layers of canopy trees, each with a different color, so they look like they're different species of trees. And then I would do shrubs, which would be a separate layer. I may have 3 layers for shrubs, and then I would have a layer for understory, 3 layers for understory. Each one of those layers could have a different effect applied to it, so they don't all look like the same round green dot with a little bit of highlight and shadow. It gives a little bit more variety. Um, you know, it's not necessarily perfectly representing what the plan is, but it makes it a little bit more interesting. So in this case, green is great, but boy, it's a lot of green. Don't really need that much. I'll turn on my contours layer. Hey, that adds a little bit more. You'll notice there's some issues with masks showing up as white. Again, that can be solved by changing the layer state to a multiply, because white, when it multiply, oh, did I not do that? I didn't do that to the right layer. When you take that and multiply, the white doesn't multiply anything. It doesn't make it any darker. It doesn't do anything like that. So it clears that up. So that's one way to get around those kind of export issues. Let me see, layer. A lot of times one of the effects I usually add to the lawn areas is to add some sort of shadow to them. Again, this just comes back to me uh, messing around with different options, and I kind of came up with this one that I liked. Oops, wrong button. Um, One thing in Photoshop, one of the things that you can toggle between, you can hit the control button down and it changes your icon to be the selection tool. So I would select everything on that layer just like that. If you hold down, let me see, the Alt key and go in between layers, now this layer will only show up where layer 4 is located. So let's mess with that a little bit. I could take the exact same color of lawn. If I change this to be a multiply and I get a big pencil, let's see, bigger than that. I'll go in here and I'll make it look all ugly. I'll just kind of outline, you know, edges of hardscapes, where the building might be, edge of pavement. It doesn't have to be real exact in this for this technique. Okay, here's this on this side. I'll go through, highlight different areas of steep slopes, things like that. So now it doesn't look that great. I have green just running all over the place, but there's a ton of filters that are in Photoshop. I usually go to a blur. I go to Gaussian blur, which just basically means it just blurs in all directions. So then I'll increase the amount of blur to a certain point so you can see that there's a little bit of shadow there. It gives a little bit of texture to the grass. And I do this technique for most of the layers. And that's how you just build it up. You block down color first quickly. For each layer, you put a different color, a different type of material. You get those laid in there. You get those in the proper elevation height. And then you can start going back and adding details and highlights and shadows. And Photoshop can make it fairly simple once you learn different ways of applying it. One thing that we do a lot is if of buildings. Now, let me see. I didn't label these, so it's harder to figure out what I have. So layer 2 is my building. So you can select your layer 2, and if you just double click in this area, it brings up a whole layer style menu. And this is how I would go about adding drop shadows. So here's, I'll head a drop shadow. You can set which direction the light is coming from. So I usually look for the north arrow, and I set it so that the light is coming from the south. So you just kind of match that to your north arrow. And then you'll start seeing, you can change your distance. Notice how I can move it farther away from the building. Shadows are doing it this way can be a little bit, they're not exact because they just move. See, this should have that angle in there closed in as a shadow. You can also adjust the spread so it gets a little larger. You can adjust the size, how much is going out. So you can make all these adjustments so that it looks appropriate. You can also adjust the opacity. So if you don't want it real dark, you go like that. I usually don't keep spread that high. But distance is how far, size is then. You'll notice how it gets a little bit more blurry. So you might pick up something like that. And this is where having your buildings and your pavement and everything like that is separate, because right now, let me make this different. Let me change this. So all I did there was change the direction of the sun that the sun was coming from, and that moves the shadow. So now you'll see the shadow is being blocked by the pavement. That's not how it would work. So, oops. So you would take the pavement has to go below the building layer. And as soon as you do that, now the shadow goes out over top of the pavement, which would be more realistic. You would do the same kind of thing if you had the pattern for the plaza area, the pavers, the concrete. Like I said, it all depends on making sure that you have a layer for each item and getting them in the proper order. Okay, let's go back over to the finished product. And that's a little bit easier to understand. So that's the basic. That's the biggest thing I can recommend. It's just everything has its own separate layer. That way you can add a different effect to every single item. So right now we have just the lawn and the water shown up here. Basic blue, just blocking everything out. If we went back up through here, somewhere there's existing gravel on this site. I'm not sure where. Existing pavement. So we can look at this. If I turn off the effects, it's just a gray outline. Oh, I see the gravel. It's the railroad bed. So really, all I'm doing is going through first, blocking out roughly plain colors where everything goes. So there's existing buildings. Here's what I wanted to show. So existing buildings, I just go in, fill in blank color. Great. Now these are all residential, or most of them are residential. So, if I wanted a roof on them, I can go quickly into my effects, and there's an option called bevel and emboss. And this is where I would go through. If I turn that off, hey, they're just flat. It still has the shadow. That's a separate effect. But I can go down to bevel and emboss, turn that on, and it just is basically drawing from the corners. So that's the key to, if you have a unclean, if your line work for your block is not clean, it will affect how your roof line looks. If you look up here, it tried to do a radial type of thing, so it not exactly how that, but again, we're just kind of roughing it in, getting the idea of what this unit may look like. I know this is a flat roof building, so it does not have a roof like that at all. So you could get really detailed and actually split apart different types of buildings depending on the roof structure so that you could add details later on. And really, I just don't have much more to discuss. I mean, there's a lot of things to Photoshop that it's just a trial and error. So here, oops, what layer is that? That's the aerial. You can see it, put the aerial in the background. Now that aerial layer is 30% opacity, so you can see most of it through. I can up that to 100, and you would not see anything that's below it. So we lose a lot of stuff. We don't want that. So that was at 30. So really it's just a process of putting down color, different layers, and then going back and messing with the different details, the different effects on each layer and see how you want to make that look. If you want, I have created a very large amount of examples. Let me see, is it this one? No, not that one. In the S drive, there we go. In the S drive, I created a PDF of the contact sheet, all PDF. I went through last night and created a PDF, or now this looks really bad because they're not high res. It would have taken forever to do this really high res, but it gives an idea. Let me see, page fit. There we go. So there's 12 renderings per page. I think there's 52 pages. These are renderings that I've done in the past for different purposes. So you'll see here, this one was primarily to show the different roads. This is Springfield Commons, so we had quite a, yeah, that's Springfield Commons. A lot of different examples here of the roads and how they would work. We did a lot of renderings for Springfield Commons, so you might have all sorts of different options. And again, the way that you render things depends on also the scale of your presentation. So here was a rendering we did for Springfield Commons that showed the density or the type of units that would be on each lot. It can be used for lots of different ways to communicate your intent to, the client, to the public, for marketing purposes. This is like land use map. Some of these we could have probably done in CAD just as quick with colored hatching. But there's, like I said, there's 52 pages of these, so somewhere a little over 600 renderings examples. And then they have the file name underneath of them. PSD is the Photoshop format for files. It hasn't changed in a long time, so that's fortunate for us so that we can use the older software still and be compatible with future software. But lots of different examples on here, different techniques. I kind of was looking through here and seeing how my style has changed over the years. Now there's also examples in here of some projects that I worked in SketchUp and Photoshop. So here's a 3D rendering of a sports center with a completely different technique. It's supposed to look more like a wet marker over top of stuff. Trying to do different examples of the project. Here's more. This is what Village Nittany Glen, showing different phases of the project of when it was being planned out. So lots of different techniques. There's some in here that they don't have any rendering in them. They just got stuck in there for some reason. It was all automated, so I didn't do a lot of work on it. And then there's also ones where the client has asked us to do renderings of their buildings. So, going through, just kind of giving an idea to the public what the site would look like. And that primarily has been the main reason why we've done renders for our projects. Like I said, there's tons of different examples. Here's a bubble diagram, a little bit looser. That is the movie theater near Lowe's. So we have that one, and here's a final one up here. I also, somewhere I have a 3D renderings with SketchUp for that project. This is Elksview Townhomes out in Boalsburg. C3 before like all the other stuff got built here. So a lot of different examples. You can always refer back to them. We have blow-ups to give an idea. This is Springfield Commons again. It's just say, hey, here's what we're thinking as far as playground equipment. This was more of this is being shown to prospective house buyers or to, just as a marketing tool by Springfield Commons. I think they also had to show it to Harris Township just to give them an idea of what kind of facilities we were thinking of putting in. Lots of stuff, lots of different ways to utilize it. The main purpose, though, is to communicate to people that are not as familiar with our technical plans. So there's lots of options there to look at. And then the final, let me see, final thing I want to show today is, where did it go? Um, I came across some new tools for AI rendering. It's got a ways to go. Okay, let's see. This is it here. Let's see. It's very small right now. Uh, this is the Bellefonte waterfront. I put it into the AI. I said, hey, this is a master plan. I want to see uh, lush vegetation. And it went crazy and added all these parking lots outside of our site. So you can kind of see this is our site here. This still has fairly close to the same building footprints, but you know, this is a first try, quick idea. I got some things right, got a lot of things wrong. I don't think we have anything to worry about quite yet, but this took 30 seconds. I'm sure once we figure out a way to utilize it and make it go quicker and be a little bit more exact. I mean, it tried to render our title blocks and everything. So some work needs to be done on this example. Let me see. Did I have another? Yes. So that was the master plan style, and then this was without any style on it. So you'll notice it starts a little better, blocking out. For some reason, it read the stream as being a roadway. You know, so it has work to be done, but again, it was quick. It gave me a lot of color real fast. Like it tried to render our title blocks, but we'll see how that goes. We'll keep an eye on those tools and see what happens there. And that's all I have for today. I hope I gave you an overview of what is included when I prepared rendering. Um, make it a little clearer, what goes into it. Uh, Probably one of the largest, let me see, the biggest thing that takes the most time is the more detail that the plan has, the longer it takes. So if there's planting plans, vegetation's hundreds of trees, each one of those trees would really need to be clicked on in Photoshop. There's no easy way to say, color all the trees this color. Um, so there's different techniques, many ways to do it, and I'm always open to try to give answers to questions if you're interested in attempting rendering. With that, we'll end today's demonstration. I hope you have a great day. Thanks.